out. So as you walk around, you can in fact see little scenes that organize themselves that are really like little composed, like little pictures that you can see from different positions. So one of the things we want to do is fill our space in a way that helps us appreciate the railroad. I am trying to get to the next, all of a sudden, there we are. Now, other times you need to find a space for a structure that belongs in a particular area. Now, it so happens I now have a single diesel, a 44 tonner, and I had to have a place to put it. But then it occurred to me we needed to fuel it. Well, there was this very, very tiny space. This is around 3-4 inches. And it turns out that BTS makes a great kit, but like so many of their kits, it's only an HO. So I just built it from scratch. It is no big deal. In fact, that's one really good way to get into scratch building, is to look at kits from really good places like BTS or Bar Mills, and use that as a start, because you will get the proportions and where the windows go and things like that. This is a very simple kit, so it's not a problem. And I like this particular picture here. You have a fireman waiting for his engine. That's Mike Tylick's old Forney to come off. They get settled up, tracks the line, and he's ready to go. You'll notice in the foreground there, this is the oil pipeline. This is a lovely little kit, really cheap, by Selly, which Artista now sells. It comes unpainted with a batch of wires and wheels and things that you put on it. And that is really handy to have on almost any layout. You could stick that and it would work out. All the rest of the things here, behind us, we see a BTS kit. The thing to the right is a scratch built thing. Now, the reason that's kind of relevant is whenever I start out to build, I have to decide, do I really want to work in plastic or do I want to work in wood? And they each have fantastic benefits. If your cuts and joints are right, plastic is wonderful because you get essentially instant bonding. So you can really build quickly. At the same time, one of the wonderful things is plastic takes paint beautifully. It's easy to cut windows, especially if they're these kinds of windows, much harder if they're the industrial ones, which have to be placed behind. Wood, on the other hand, has a really great advantage of, as we can see in the oil stand, of taking stain beautifully. And ever since I discovered those Canadian oil-based stains, I find some of them can be used for painting a surface. You don't actually even have to paint it. Even if it's going to be only slightly weathered, it will look good with a dark green, with a barn red, and the texture of the wood comes through. In this case, that was painted. Okay, let's get to. So this is, we see the background problem, and that's the solution, that factory. This was my problem. Every time I tried to take a picture of my layout, this big hole showed up. Now I've removed the station here, and we recently had a talk. Well, recently, the last time, I think it's been more than a year since we had a meeting that I was able to come to in person or that existed. And someone, very skillful modeler, showed us how to build buildings up so that they look like they're really sunk into the ground. I find that's not really necessary. I think if, in this case, the station was built on a platform, and I find that most of my buildings are not even fastened by more than a little tiny drop of glue because if you put scenic stuff around it, gravel, earth, you can blend it very, very easily and still have the advantage of being able to move your thing when you need it. For example, the Crosby and Son laser kit, which is O gauge, and they finally brought it back into production. I tried that to fill against the wall. And as you can see where it's unpainted, the pink styrofoam shows it's going to go in front, eventually in front of that. So the question is, how was I going to fill this in an effective way? This was the first try. And I did this basically when I was starting chemo and having a lot of problems. Sometimes I'd come down to the basement and I was too tired to do much of anything. But I wanted to use styrene and also some stone work laminated to 1/8-inch plastic. If I did this again, and I am thinking of rebuilding the tower, I would then cut holes and put the doors inside rather than outside as I have here. But you'll see even in this first try, it has some problems. One is structural and the other is cosmetic. And we'll look at those. This is here it's test installed with its Miller beer sign. But one thing that became obvious is if it rises above the back wall, where you see the yellow tank and things, you need a back wall in the model. You can't just build a flat and put it against your backdrop because there is a gap. I actually have a DCC HO train that runs behind the ON3 layout. It's a way of keeping a few things. So what did you have to do? Now this is a real Rube Goldberg bizarre way, because I found the evergreen styrene is so flexible, which makes it so easy to cut and bend and do all sorts of other things, but it was really impossible to hold up. So I started to just fit in scraps of plastic and pieces of wood to give it at least some stability. Again, if I was going to do this from scratch, I'd have gotten a lot more of the styrene. I would on some of the 1/8-inch thick stuff to brace all of this. This shows you the various ways where I thought I was going to put the windows and how I finally, spaced them out. So we would go back, and now this shows the composition, but still I haven't put the background in. But you'll notice we have the station, and you go to a slightly bigger building, which is E. Crosby and Sons, and we fill the space basically with a factory behind. So one of the principles, which I think we all know, is you put small buildings where you first start to look the outside of the layout, and you gradually increase the size of them. If you do it the other way, you can't see most of the work that you've done. And here is one of my solutions. Well, one of them, what turns out the top of that tower just didn't look right compared to most Rhode Island mills that I've seen. So I made it was very, very simple to put together a truncated pyramid tower and glue it on top. The other thing was to provide a backdrop for the upper floors. But if you're going to do that, and it's going to show at the back of the layout, it's a good idea to create little mini rooms. This is very easy with scrap plastic, and it's hard to see here, but I put in tanks and pipes and bits of machinery so it would look as if something was functioning more. In addition, I started to add more stuff on the roof because that was frankly all you could see. In addition, I added much thicker, wider L-shaped bracing on the edges because that was more in scale with what you would find on a building like this. So this is just a quick view. You get some idea of what was inside that. So you want to, where possible, I think, when you have very visible buildings that stick up, I think it's a very good idea to illuminate them. And I tend to do that with, I bought a roll of fairly inexpensively from Micromart of LED strips. You cut them off, you solder to the positive and negative. If you look really carefully, there's a tiny, tiny plus sign and a minus sign around two little ovals. That's where you solder your things. And it's very, very easy to do. Of course, you can get the Woodland Scenics plug and play stuff, which probably costs about maybe 10 times as much. Well, this is sort of the final kind of way the scene came together. But again, I noticed I had a space, and I'd always loved this better than scratch Baltimore and Ohio switch tower. So this seemed a perfect way to put next to the station, because the tracks, well, many tracks were coming together. And I added a truck, which I put on Rhode Island Die Works, decal on, made from separate letters. I moved some things around and added some a little detail. Once you start filling the space, you find that you have more opportunities to place things that you already own, or it gives you an excuse to go to the store and buy some more. This is the well-known Woodland Scenics chess players, which I had in HO, and they don't look quite as good in O, but that's okay. I put them here because it made an activity that made sense. So one of the principles of filling space on your layout is to find room for people who are doing some sort of activity that draws your eye to it and actually shows off your models and makes the scene, in a sense, believable. I had one guy from an old prizer kid who was shoveling coal. Actually, he had a pitchfork, so I glued a tiny little bit of styrofoam, a very, very thin styrene to it. I made a shovel out of it, and he's working away there. And these are just some, you can see the thing covering the shovel. And notice how things start to stack up here. There's maybe still something I could fill in behind that balcony. But now we have a scene in which the eye moves through the way it would in a real railroad scene. I have a whole bunch of these tanks built out of, some of them are just tops of things that you spray paint. Others I've added little things like hatches and ladders to. Well, I still had a problem of a space because it turned out there was still a gap on the left. And because I'm building a turntable near the harbor, I had to move this building and find a place for it. But typically enough, when you move it, you got to change it. And in this case, the man working on the roof was towards the back, which looked fine when it was very close to the edge of the layout. But now I had to move him forward, and I built a sign. There's a very well-known store in Adler's, which has been around for a long time, not since 1888, but my railroad goes back to that, so we have to have that. And so I just took the entire building as is, added the sign, moved the guy, and it fit perfectly between the two. And of course, I lit it. Of course, as I point out here, once you light a building, it's a good idea to have something inside it to look at. So even though this is far from the edge of the layout, I'm going to have to either furnish it by building a little hardware store, but I know there's a company, I've seen it in Model Railroader, that will sell printed versions of inside of stores, sort of like some of the things you find in some woodland scenics things. That might be adequate. But if not, I'll build shelves and all the rest from scrap, and it will work. So everything here, the guys with the wheelbarrow, the man on the roof, and the man shoveling up the older shingles is very old. But I saw an artistic figure then with a little trolley, dolly rather, and so I made some cut off shingles and put it on it so that fills it. And then there's a space, so I have a man who's taking a little break from his work at Rhode Island Dye Works. He's having his lunch and occasionally looking over at the other guys to see them working. Now, wouldn't it be nice if you've had all these things to have something interesting detailed near the edge of the layout? And I figured, after all, how often are we going to use, because this track ends, how is anybody use the station? So what follows is another attempt to fill the space, and some of it worked out and some of it didn't the first time. So one of the problems I've discovered when I disassembled the car, which had interior illumination by means of a grain of wheat bulb connected to the trucks, well, that was no good to me because I run dead rail. So I thought of actually just powering a section of track, but worried it might cause some shorts elsewhere with lighting or something else. So I installed a strip of LEDs and I put the car back together. But there was a problem. Once I used ACC, I fogged the windows and you really couldn't see very much. So I decided I would start again. And I got another car. I got it on eBay, decided not to cut it down. And I put together various kinds of furniture from Selly, from Devonshire Models. I believe that this is Rusty. The sofa is Rusty Stumps. The coffee table is scratch built with a little bit of plastic scrap used as a vase. And Rusty Stumps provided the actual liquor bottles on the liquor cabinet behind. So this is meant to be a palace car. And that is a business car that is very fancy, that is owned by the head of my railroad, Augustus Melmotte III, who is the son of the famous railroad swindler from Victorian novels, Augustus Melmotte. So this finished. It doesn't photograph well, but as people who visited Abscess proved, if you put your head close to it, you can actually see the inside. So this really did work. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that the wires go down through underneath the layout where they're connected to the other power. But over enthusiastic about LEDs, because I thought they really didn't give off any heat, I placed a strip the length of the car. And when I was working on something else, I just happened to touch the roof and boy, it was hot. So I had to take it apart and take out most of the LED strip. And frankly, you had quite enough light. Now, before answering what happened to the old car, it worked during the night, but I used these two artista figures to give it some sort of a reason that we should be focusing on it and even try to look inside during the day. And the one thing I will probably put is a very well-dressed man who is a bridegroom from an artista figure set, and he will be Augustus Melmotte, and he will be standing on the gold plated platform talking to someone. Well, but what happened to the old one? Well, nothing's wasted because the old part, I just simply covered up some windows, and I found out I had some I think it's styrene. I'm sorry. It's not styrene, but it's resin casting, some scrap. And one of the suggestions I got from Justin was that how valuable his belt sander was in modeling. And I discovered that if one cuts these things to length, one can easily, almost instantly sand and create a 45-degree angle and glue together a nice foundation. So I've been able to use a whole bunch of scrap stuff that I hadn't before. So the excuse for this is that, having learned that the head of the Pennsy and maybe the Boston and Maine, but certainly New York Central, all the presidents of these things all had their own private cars. Augustus Melmoth III looked over and saw his grandfather's car, now used as simply a simple storage shed, and said, well, if he had a car, I should have one. And so that explains the relation of the two cars. But also, again, I filled up a space a couple of inches wide that makes it work, and yet it does not obscure the composition of several other figures in the layout. And so that is what is going on here. And again, it fills an empty space right near the yard. Well, when I was looking at Artista, I found they had this amazing barber and customer. And I decided they were very expensive. I bought the chairs as kits rather than theirs, which I think was a good thing because their arms are very crude, and I made new arms out of very thin sheet brass I had hanging around in the scrap box. But the challenge of this model was, if these figures were that expensive, like 40 bucks, and the chairs, everything else in the what became Vincenzo's barbershop, everything else had to be from my scrap box or hanging around. I couldn't go out and buy anything new, even paint. And so this is all scrap. The painting in the background is one of those things you get from many things like museum catalogs or fabric things you just cut out. The grandfather clock and the phone on the wall and the mirror and the sink came from a $2.93 set of dollhouse stuff. The coffee table was scratch built, and I put some magazines on it. And let's see, this was supposed to be the black thing was supposed to be a stove. I cut various parts of it off, and that is supposed to be where the barber will put his tools and bottles, and I'll show you we have some more bottles. And this is how I did the wiring. The reason you put the LED strip, which, as I pointed out at a previous meeting, I find the cement that comes with them rarely holds on. And I didn't trust to use double face tape in case that might let go because of the earlier cement. So what I do is I put it on a piece of styrene, and I take small bits of scrap styrene and glue them across. And thus far, that has worked, and it hasn't come down the way the LED strip did in some other buildings. And this is the side. This is, I wanted to make, I had a little bit of this dragon tooth, so I wanted to make that a little bit of a decoration. The celly also makes the barber pole. And this is what it looks like at night. And you can see a good bit of the detail here. And just as when you move, you'll notice that I have put this very, very close to the edge of the layout. And I've decided this is a good idea because it fills up the space. but does not get in the way of observing the trains moving or the station or the various buildings behind. If you look to the right, you see a glare of a light, which one could make an excuse to say it's a bright lamp, but in fact, it's one of those LED strips that fell off the ceiling because I did it the old day and believed microbart that its adhesive would actually hold. And this is looking more in daylight. And I had some HO corbels, so I put them in. And so this thus far is Vincenzo's barbershop. Well, then I had Galilee Harbor. It had a lot of nice buildings, but there was nothing much in the water. Well, I got from a British company for which I am going to build my turntable, and I got kits for 3 flat cars and this 1902 paddler steamboat. And frankly, I built this, which is one of the hardest models I've ever built, as an excuse for not starting on the turntable because it looks so terrifying. Though I promised myself I'm going to start in a week or 2. And that hole in the steam wheel activator is actually not bigger than a human hair. I couldn't believe that I could drill it. I left this unpainted just so one could see. One has to put almost everything together on this kit, and everything except these metal things, all of these wooden parts are actually laser cut. He has laser cut circle things that are less than 1/8 of an inch in diameter, and lots of them, and he has you build them up. And it works. And this is the paddle wheel. Pretty much the way it is supposed to be done without any major mistakes. There's a rudder, 2 rudders you can put in there, but I decided not to bother, mostly because you can't see them at all. And I was going to put in, that was the final thing, is I had to put some a wake to make it make some sort of sense. But then, isn't there still a space to fill? How about putting an artist and an easel at work? I had hanging around a Prizer arc welder, but I already had a building with an arc welder inside it, and I had a Woodland Scenics acetylene welder with his tanks, and I figured, my layout isn't that big. How many welders does one need? So this thing sat around for several years until I found what to do with it. Well, that's the welder. So the first thing I did, this is a good, as I said, one evening project. First, you cut off the torch, and I made a little artist palette, and on their colors on the top, and you paint him. I've got a face at this point, hadn't been painted, and I just left what would have been the metal bar that you use in arc welding to do the weld. I just left that and painted it so it would look a little bit as if it was a paintbrush, and I put a white stained smock on the guy. I also painted his hair and face club and a few other things, and put them together here. It turns out the easel was made from 3 pieces of very thin brass stock, the same stuff I made the barber shop chair handles out of. And no one was more surprised than I was when I put 2 of them together, put a 3rd one on top with a piece of wood to hold it up, touched it with a soldering iron, and that was it. It actually worked. I then took a bit of old HO rail, and because I had a ledge on it, and I soldered that to the legs. The painting is, again, one of those things that you see in a catalog. So I needed another space that was filled. Years ago, I built a beautiful module with fine scale miniature structures. And unfortunately, when I moved to the present house, it got flipped and destroyed, which always was very sad. And Justin, someone is always giving Justin materials. When I'm leaving the hobby, I'm moving away, and someone gave them the left-hand part of the sawmill. And I needed a place for it because I had a lumbering operation. And I realized that looking at the fine scale miniatures template, which I had kept, if one just simply doubled it in size, it would work for a small O scale lumbering operation. And all of this is built out of styrene, which, as I said, one of the great advantages of working in styrene is that it assembles amazingly quickly. The weakness is that if you use ACC and other things, it very often will melt the paint or ruin your paint, and it's hard to fix up. But this was going to be an easier job. The rest of the mill was built out of coffee stirrers stained with alcohol and a few other little details. The workshop here, the workbench, which is a little crude, is a rusty rail, not rusty stumps, a resin casting. And here's one of my welders getting ready to work. And I thought the whole scene came alive when I took one of those prizer figures that I had, and I had him holding the board. And if you see down below here, you see a switch. That is what turns on the sound of the rushing water in a stream that I have. And here is a close-up of the guy, and it seemed to me it gave a focus, and it made the thing a lot more believable. And of course, I mentioned the rusty reel, and I just stuck. This is one of those cheap Chinese figures. I got something like 100 of them for $14, and then you sort of have to paint them. Some of them are usable, a few are not. Well, then I had made this kit bash crane, but I really didn't have any use for it. It was near the station, but suddenly now I had a use for it as a lumber crane. The bottom of it is a cosmetic container. The rest of it is scratch built, and like models, which no longer is an English company, which no longer exists. I believe I bought this kit at the Hartford show. Otherwise, it's one of those I've had around for 30 years from when I worked in England for a while. And this is the latest project, not yet finished here. There's no facing on it, but I always go back to the Kalmbach book on simple basic structures. When I built the first things I built, scratch built in HO, and they are the first ones I built in O gauge. And again, I had some of that foundation. So this is the building just sitting here. I've illuminated, it's not illuminated yet. The doors aren't finished, but it is finished inside. But this is the latest way of filling a space. So that's the project. And that's what I did during all the months when one didn't see a lot of people. And I had a lot of fun doing it. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the things that I've presented.
Nice job, George.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Any questions?
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work, but a lot of fun.
Man, you got a lot of patience.
Well, but you know, what else do you have when during COVID?
Yeah, I know it's tough.
Yeah,
I know.
it's a good time for modeling projects.
I wish I was down here in East Greenwich at the meeting. I couldn't be down here today because I'm in the middle of buying a house.
Well, good luck on that.
Well, I got good luck because I got the houses. I'm just waiting to close. But oh my God, so much paperwork. Oh, you couldn't even believe it. I could use a lumber cart full of trees. There's so much paperwork.
Get that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they make it hard now. They really make it hard. Because they worry about all this stuff now, like money laundering and everything else. And what happens is, I told somebody that says, well, you know, they're worried about money laundering. I says, my wife is good for money laundering because she never takes the money out of my pockets. She throws them in the wash.
Yeah. Sue, are we going to start the other movie now? Steve, can you hear me?
Steve, Sue, David?
They're
Anybody?
probably muted. They shouldn't be muted there.
No,
No, Steve doesn't show him muted.
Yes,
I heard Sue earlier.
there he is.
Sue, David? Hello? We can't hear
Steve's
you.
talking, but I can't read lips.
Neither can I.
You're muted.
Yeah, Steve muted.
Steve's muted.
Can somebody send him a text? Wait, hold on.
Okay, can you hear me
Yeah,
now?
Now I
yes.
can hear
Okay,
you.
Steve.
Are we going to
Okay.
start the movie now?
No, we're not doing the movie, right? No, 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 no.
No. Hello.
You're muted now.
Oh, I like those little trolleys in the background.
Yeah, that's out at the East Troy Electric Railroad Museum in East Troy, Wisconsin.
You know, they still have I believe they still have a one line, I think it's in Iowa, that uses electric engines.
Yeah, they do. I forget the name of the town, but yes, they do.
Iowa Traction?
Yes, that's it. That's it.
The
Yes,
Iowa
they do.
Traction, Yeah. I don't know how to run them. I don't know if I can run them. Because I'm a locomotive engineer, so I
Right.
run 100 different trains, but I never ran electric. It can't be that hard, I don't think.
I don't know if you wrote word for Condot
Can you
or
hear me?
something like that, then you'd probably be okay. If you haven't,
Hello?
how different it
Yeah,
is.
we can hear you, Steve. Hi, everybody.
Hello?
Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah,
Hey,
we're not doing the movie.
Okay, Steve, were there any questions about my talk? Anybody want to ask anything?
Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
Thank you, George.
You're welcome again.
Thanks, George.
Hi, everybody in East Greenwich.
Okay, we're going to postpone the video on the iron and steel industry until some future date. We need volunteers for the weekend of November 6th and 7th, the weekend of the train expo. We'll be setting up on the 6th, having the expo and breaking down on the 7th. I do not have the hours here on my notes, but I have them at home and I will get them out to the board. And so when Linda sends out her next fall call, we'll have people having the times available for them and so on. Okay?
Can we request on that demo, whatever the next release is, that we have some kind of response to sign up?
Yeah.
Use my address.
Anything you want.
Yeah.
Yep. You use David's address as opposed to mine because I won't be here. And that way he'll have a record of who said they were showing up. And if they don't show up, he can beat them around the head and shoulders. Set the minions on them and the dragons. Okay. Coming meetings, the November meeting is the Train Expo. With a little bit of luck,
I'm saying before you run any more flyers, you should adjust it so it says Expo. These don't. No, these all say X.
Might be a difference in the printer.
yeah,
Who has X?
I have X.
Oh,
I have.
Let's get it done what we, if we can, pass on what we can. I think they'll get the picture. Well, just throw it over if you want.
Yeah. Coming events, the November meeting is the Train Expo. With a little bit of luck, we will have our December meeting here again. Will be our holiday party, Yankee Swap and Swedish meatball cook-off. January 2022, to be announced. Only planned for the end of the year. Anyone have any comments, discussions, moans, groans? Go ahead, David.
Just again, turn Owen to the XEXP. And if you can put them up any place you can, appreciate it. And we'll have another set to go out. Like anybody needs a PDF, let me know. I'll send you a PDF of it. A PDF, yeah, okay. And who has the ladder? You know what I'm talking about?
It's in North Kingstown, in storage.
Okay, we want to bring that to the show,
Yes,
including the G scale.
Right, right.
And just a note, we had 4 people online, George, of course, James,
open shop,
Doug, and Bob Peters.
right.
And 5 of us here were on only 2.
But it worked.
Excellent, it was very good.
Yep.
Was
So the
Steve-
North
is
Kingstown
Steve Lee-
tables and the scale level.
So everybody knows, I was trying to bring it up in the sanctuary, so I could type it to these speakers, but we've got so jury rigged in there, I couldn't get it come to the speak, but I'll work on that.
Our next Zoom meeting, I guess, might be December, but certainly January.
Yeah,
We just worked out something on the stuff. The picture quality, the view from the, and that's why I was on, I want to see how it looked out there, was perfect. I think this was super.
yeah, you showed me what it looked like. It did look good. Maybe a little bit fuzzy and hard to see and hear, but coming through people's computers, it looked very good, yeah.
But we had, like I said, we had 4 people online, so we're gonna add that to the number of people.
Right, I've got a list of 16 bodies and 4. Not bad,
You know, once you get George going, you can't shut it off.
no.
It was a good presentation, I like it.
Yeah, he did a nice job. Anything else anyone wants to add to the mix? Yes,
I just want to say thank you guys for the gift certificate.
oh, you're welcome.
You know, and thanks for coming to, you know, to my house for the picnic. Actually, that's part of, the best part that I had, and enjoyed you guys coming. So,
I like your clouds too.
Thank you, Mike.
Mike, I like your clouds.
well, that's a controversy, but you know what? Look good, there's Jack, and looks good. And, I have a couple of 6-foot tables, I have a couple checks. I'll stop in left.
Okay, that's what we have here.
Yeah, if you only, you know, you don't put them all the way up, they're gonna be about yay high, so.
Yeah, that's
If
what
you
we
run
want
into
to
a
get.
problem, let me know, and I can bring those to you.
Okay. I know we have little card things too. But they're too, we have to put 4, 5, and 6 together.
Yeah,
So I just gotta see what they've got. They got little chairs and all that.
We're gonna have to work the logistics. DK brought up, you know, given the COVID situation with the kids, you might have to sanitize what they touch after they leave the table. I don't, we'll have to see what happens when we get there.
They can make them use hand sanitizer before they touch anything.
Good point, good point.
The kids are pretty used to that. When we had
Yeah,
our kids
yeah,
here
yeah.
for vacation Bible school. They came in, first thing they did was go to the squirt
Yeah, we'll
box.
set up a station for hand sanitizer.
Yeah, the teachers probably do that.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate all of us, all we do is choke all day.
Well, I think that if you're thinking, anybody who's going to medical school, dermatology is gonna be a really booming thing in a few years.
Rich,
I don't remember.
pardon?
I don't remember when I club dues. I do.
There are no club dues.
No, he's not a member, so. he-
Okay, so-
I usually send something in August and I'm way behind.
Okay,
I will get something.
don't panic.
We're gonna tell Region that we're having Boy Scouts.
Pardon?
Are we gonna tell Regional that we have Boy Scouts?
No. The less they know, the better.
What they don't know won't hurt.
But yet there's a model railroad badge.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay,
Oh, just a quick,
David.
just a reminder, there's the October convention in Lowell. Can probably still get some tickets up there.
You probably can. As to the convention, we originally planned on going to the convention, but given it's only 2 weeks and a couple of days after surgery, at this point, all I'm doing for the convention is one of Pete Watson's minute clinics on Friday afternoon. We'll drive up, I'll sit there, do my thing, and we'll go home. I'm not booked into the convention at all. So if I happen to see you that Friday afternoon, fine. Otherwise, have a good time. If I don't feel well, I will email Pete as soon as I know I to say, you're only gonna have 3-minute clinics instead of 4.
Oh, as far as I know, there are still rooms available at the hotel. There's still spaces, not rooms.
Yeah,
They have about 150 right now.
yeah,
which
that's
is
what
about
I heard,
normal,
yep.
Which is about normal.
Yesterday, I signed up for a tour of the MBTA Communication and Control Center.
Uh-huh,
One in Boston.
Yeah,
That's a good place.
and there's another one that they're touring the facility they're building for the community.
Yeah. I think the ones that build, we'll get to see them build the room.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. One in Boston is nice.
The other thing too,
It's in South Station. Well, this is a brand new. They built a new one a couple of years ago.
the Chester and Beckett and will be at the January show up in Springfield. They'll
Right.
join us.
and I was about to say, the Rhode Island Colony N scale will not be in Springfield. We had much discussion at the board meeting at the beginning of August, and we decided the problems we might encounter with taking the N scale up there were just too insurmountable. There were too many different modules owned by too many different people, and we would have to have too many people backing and forthing and backing, and it just wasn't worth the aggravation. So we will not be going. The idea was wonderful, and I know when it was first brought up, a lot of us were very enthusiastic. When you start looking at what it was going to take to pull that off, it was just too much. So N scale won't be there. But we are booked into Cumberland Library in March.
Yes.
So we'll have our on the road roadshow in March. Excellent. Thank you, Linda.
For the meeting date, is it
Whatever date we picked, I can't remember what it was.
okay?
Hang on 1 minute.
It'll be the first Saturday. in
March 5th,
Oh, okay, that's the second Saturday.
first.
First Saturday.
Couldn't be.
March 5th, first Saturday in March.
The second, the first Saturday in March is the second.
Try 2022. Wrong year. We were dealing the Dallas Shorty the year out.
This is Menos.
Okay. Meeting. Adjourned.
That's her invitation. That's for you too.
board meeting, I can do that via Zoom.
Okay, meeting's over. So I'm signing off.
All right, Steve, have a good one.
Good.
Take care.
Oh, well, not bad for first effort.